What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Tequila Tuesday. I'm Scott Leese. Welcome to Scotty's Little Sales Club, powered by Sendoso, our official sending partner. We have a really fun conversation going on for you tonight. We're talking about the future of sales with some weird and wacky ideas, some untethered ideas about being W-2 free as an AE and all sorts of non-commission sales orgs and all sorts of weird shit like that. And one of the best people I could think of to talk to about this and partner with on this is Sahil Mansuri, the CEO and founder of Bravado. If you don't know Bravado in the war room, make sure you check them out. He's doing big things over there. What I love about Sahil is that he's sort of equal parts brash, bold, daring, humorous, annoying, and frustrating to deal with sometimes, argumentative at times. And all of those things I actually think are also like me. And maybe that's why we get along. And maybe that's why we kind of, yeah, very funny, Ryan. Stop describing yourself. I am aware of this. And maybe that's why we get along pretty good. Sahil, welcome to Tequila Tuesday, man. You're in charge. Take it away.
What an intro. I don't know how to live up to that. I would say that, yeah, you and I share, an uncanny ability to say exactly what's on our minds despite the consequences thereof. So I suppose there's merit to that. Hi everyone, so nice to meet you. As we already said, I would love for this to be a conversation and not be like me talking at you. And in order to create such a vibe, I'll just start like randomly calling on people based on their facial feature reactions. Like if I see someone like Ryan started laughing, Thomas started laughing, right? I'm paying attention. Don't worry, Cynthia, I see you there. And so I'm very comfortable just calling on people and being like, hey, what are you laughing about? What are you thinking? So be on the lookout. This is going to be interactive. The topic that we're covering today is something that I'm, super excited about and want to get into. So that I can get some context here, I would love to understand who it is that's in the room. Maybe I can just like quick show of hands for me. Quick show of hands if you are an SDR. Can I see if there's any SDRs in here? All right, got a couple. Cool. Quick show of hands if you're an account executive. AE, some sort of closing role. Yeah, okay, a couple of those. Raise your hand if you're a sales leader of sorts, some sort of sales leader. Okay, so a bunch of those. All right, cool. Founder, CEO. Yeah, a few of those. Is there a prototype? Is there a category I missed, Scott, that I should have asked?
Yeah, customer success leader.
Oh yeah, CS. Sorry, CS folks. Yeah, okay.
There's a couple people there.
Anyone between things, I guess, looking for a gig might be thinking about something, or
there's a couple people. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. That's helpful.
We got it almost all covered.
We got it all covered. Okay. Yeah, I think I saw the greatest density around AE and sales leader from what I saw, but maybe I missed something there. Okay, cool. So the topic that we're covering today, which I'm like just super excited to talk about, is something that Scott and I've spent a bunch of time thinking about, which really dives into what the future of sales looks like. So I'll start by telling you a quick story, which is that I was when I was 22 years old, I joined this little startup called Glassdoor. And at the time, Glassdoor was 20 employees. We had 8 customers, and the biggest of which was paying us $1,000 a month. We did, I think it was $6,500 in revenue the first month I was there. And when I left Glassdoor 3-ish years later, I was running like a 60-odd person team. And the biggest customer that we had was Google, which was paying us north of $1 million a year. And that month, the last month that I was there, I think the sales team closed in all like close to 3 million that month. And so, we were at like a $35 million annual run rate from $6,500 when I started. So that was a really fun experience. I was the third salesperson or whatever when we got there. And basically built the enterprise sales team at Glassdoor by first being I was the first enterprise sales director. And that didn't mean anything, just to be clear. I was my own SDR, my own AE, my own CSM. Because I was Indian, they made me do the sales ops too. They're like, he will figure it out, you know? And so like it was a very IC driven role for a long time. And because of that, I spent the majority of my time, almost all my time when I was there, selling. That's what I spent my time doing. And I closed some pretty big accounts while I was there. In 1 month, there's 1 month in particular that was really awesome, where I closed Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, and Google in the same month. And
That should be like a trivia question. Like, who here has closed 75% of FANG in 1 month?
yeah, that's right.
No one other than Sahil.
And we'll get to why I'm telling you this story. It's not just to talk about myself, I promise, though I do enjoy doing that. No, it's not to talk about myself. It's coming to, I think, a really important point around how salespeople should value themselves. So we're going to talk about the value of a salesperson today. And so I did that. And I could, Ford, Costco, I don't know, Walmart, like I think like 50 of the Fortune 100 I closed myself, or Fortune 250 or whatever the ranking was, I don't know. And when I left Glassdoor, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I left. That's not true. I got fired. And the reason I got fired is the same reason why almost every sales leader or salesperson gets fired, because the company wants to bring in some seasoned executive who knows what they're doing. So they hired this silver fox guy who came from BMC Software, who was a fucking joke and couldn't have sold anything to save his life. And had terrible strategies and whatever, and et cetera, et cetera. But he drove a really nice BMW and, was very handsome. He was probably excellent at golf, had a really nice watch, et cetera, and promptly got fired less than 18 months later. But anyway, this is a movie we've seen before, right? Yeah, good suit. Yeah. Actually, we didn't wear suits because we were in Sausalito, but very nice dress shirts. Very expensive looking. Yeah, gotta be there. Hair perfect, nails manicured, the whole 9 yards. Couldn't sell for shit though. Did not lead a sales team. Didn't know how to sell. So those were the only two flaws. Besides that, he was awesome. So they hired that guy. And he fired me because I was like, you're a joke. And he knew I thought he was a joke, and that didn't go along so well. But after Glassdoor, I was trying to figure out what to do next. And it was really interesting. I found I had so many companies that were reaching out to me that were all in the HR space. Indeed, LinkedIn, Monster, Career Builder, AngelList, Hired, Vettery, I think was a company at the time. There's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of these like ATS guy, Greenhouse and Lever. And like I had conversations with a ton of people in HR. And I ultimately decided not to stay in HR because I was like, selling to HR sucks. I don't think I want to keep doing this. But the thing that was interesting is they all valued me for the same reason. What they valued me for was the fact that I had this like incredible Rolodex of enterprise clients that they wanted to sell to, that they knew I could get them in through the door. By this time, I built a little bit of a reputation for myself as being a kind of a top seller in in HR. And so in having these conversations, like it was really interesting to see that. And I kept trying to think like, do I want to work for one versus the other? And I was weighing the pros and cons. And eventually I kind of just like, went off and did ad tech for a while and this and that. So I ended up in like a totally different place. And the reason I tell that story is because one thing that I didn't know then, because I was young and stupid and whatever. But one thing that I wish I had done is I wish I'd worked for all of them. What I wish I had done is I should have said, hey, I can get you into this list of accounts. Like, here's my Rolodex from Glassdoor. And by the way, and I was selling directly to the VP of Talent, CHRO, like the top person, like Lisa Brummel, who's the CHRO of Microsoft, or at least was at the time and had been there for 25 years, was like a personal friend of mine. Lori Goler, who still runs HR at Meta today, then Facebook, friend, have her cell phone, like these were people that I knew really well. I'd done a pretty decent job of building strong relationships with these people. Still maintain a lot of them today, to be honest. What I wish I'd done is just been like, hey, what is a meeting with Lori Goler worth to your company? Like, how much would you pay to pitch the VP of talent at Facebook? Like, because I can get you that meeting tomorrow. How much is it worth to you? $5,000, 10 grand? Like, how much would a company pay for that? You spend 50 grand on a trade show booth. You're not getting Lori Goler showing up to your trade show booth, right? So how is it 20 grand? How much would you pay? And if I multiply that by the, 100 HR tech companies that were out there, and then I multiplied that by the 50 enterprise relationships that I had cultivated in that time, I probably could have made a few $1,000,000 a year just taking companies and bringing them to these folks. Plus, of course, a cut of whatever revenue if they ended up closing the deal. So it could have been, I could have like literally worked like, I don't know, 100 hours a year, 200, 500 hours a year, something like that, and made north of $1,000,000. But instead, what I did, I went to go work for some shitty company, worked like 80 hours a week, and the founder ended up running the company into the ground. And I didn't get, I got, let's just call it 250K for 80 hours a week. When instead I probably could have made with 80 hours a week if I'd been doing it full time. What I was talking about, like what if I kept bringing products to the market, maintaining relationships, building new ones, I don't know, 5 mil, 10 mil, easy, could have cleared it. And so, it's always stuck with me that the best salespeople are dramatically undervalued in much the same way that a salary cap undervalues top athletes. Like LeBron James or Steph Curry or whatever, these guys sign these contracts and it's like 4 years, 250 million or something like that. Like that's like the biggest contract you can get. And it's actually kind of a joke because if LeBron James could be paid anything, if he could go on the open market, someone would pay him 100 mil a year. Like soccer players get paid like these like $250 million contracts and stuff. There's no salary cap. Like, having LeBron James on your team and then him repping your brand and then all the ad dollars and attendance and stuff that comes with it. LeBron James is worth 100 million a year easy, but he gets paid like 40 million a year. So he's losing $60 million a year. Think about that. Just because a bunch of owners came together and said, you know what, we're going to put a salary cap and we're not going to spend this much. Even though the same owners would definitely pay him 100 million to have come play for their team. And so in the way that salary caps screw over athletes, I think working for a single company screws over top salespeople and top sales leaders because it is such a rarity, like the number of people who have an enterprise relationship with the, VP of people at Meta are so low. And then yet the number of people who want to have a relationship with that person is so high that there should be a market around that. There should be a true market. And so that's something that has stuck with me for a long time. And it's not something that I have a solution for fully built out yet. It's something I'm working on, something, Scott and I are partnering on some things and we'll talk more about that later. But it's something that's always stuck with me, which is that like salespeople, and it's not just, by the way, relationships with accounts, like you think about a different skill. I was actually talking to the CRO of Sprig today. You guys know, I'm sorry, not Sprig, Spiff. You guys know Spiff? It's like a sales compensation company or whatever. Yeah. So I was talking to the CRO of this company and he's got a great track record. He's worked at a bunch of great companies and he's a super smart guy. I really liked him. And I was telling him the same thing and he was agreeing, that like how many people want to have an amazing CRO, but can't afford one, can't afford a 500K, 400K CRO. And then a second follow-up question to that is how many people want to have that CRO and can afford it, but can't recruit that person? Your company's just not good enough. Like, if you're like, I don't know, what's the hot shot company these days? Every company's in the shitter, right? What's hot these days?
Nothing's hot right now.
Nothing's hot right now. I don't know what used to be hot. I can't even. Figma. Figma's hot these days. That's a company that's hot. Okay, so whoever is the CRO of Figma, right? I mean, imagine that person could command 10x what they're making if they were to do it fractionally, and they were to say, hey, I'll work with 10, 20 folks. And obviously Scott is like one of the pioneers of this, but like, the skill of how to set up a comp plan properly, the skill of how to develop pricing, skill of how to recruit, building a recruiting funnel and process, the skill of how to hire the first people, build the playbook. Like all these are super rare skills. Like the number of people on this planet that know how to take a product to market successfully for the first time is finite. And the number of companies that need to do that is infinite, right? And so like, given the supply demand economics of this, it doesn't make any sense if you're really good at your job to work at one company, because you're putting all your eggs in that basket. So from an equity standpoint, you're basically kind of screwed. And if that company doesn't do well, which is obviously outside of your control, right? Because it's like you're not developing none of us are building product, right? Or very few of us, I would guess, are building product. So what if the engineering team sucks? What if the CEO can't get financing because they're not good at fundraising? What if the investors get skittish and start, getting heavy-handed with stuff? There's 100 what ifs, none of which are in your control. And then there's all the things that are in your control, which could still presumably go wrong. Like, what if a competitor just comes in and cleans ass? And so you have all these issues that could presumably come up, and yet we continue to operate in a world in which, like, if you don't have a full-time, like, there's this idea that, like, you have to go and build it, and like, like those that can do and those that can't teach, and there's like all this like weirdness around that in sales. But I'll tell you what, my friends, I really believe that in the future of sales, top sales leaders and top sales professionals will opt to work for themselves instead of working for a company, and will instead say, you can't have this. You can rent it, you can borrow it for part of the time, right? And Scott's got some amazing frameworks and stuff that he's built that I've seen that are really cool around this. But like, man, I just think that as a top salesperson, like if you're really good, you can probably make 5 to 10 times as much money as you're making while having 5 to 10 additional stakes of equity, right? So you have more equity across all these different companies. So if one of them goes well, it's better for you, while working half as hard and having more time with your family and your kids and whatever, and still creating incredible value for the companies that you work with. So that's the opening kind of stanza of this. And then there's a bunch of other stuff I want to talk about, but let's kind of pause there. It's in a lot of comments in the chat. Anyone have any thoughts around that? Dylan, Dylan, what's going on? What do you mean you came from this world? Tell me more.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in the car. Yeah, so I worked in the surf lifestyle brand industry. I worked for O'Neill, and ultimately they would contract out to sales reps. The reps would hold the territories for like 10, 15, 20 years. The best reps had all the ins, had all the top military accounts, large national retailers. And if you're a brand that wanted the door, you just call the right guy and he'd get you, X amount of revenue in the first year. It was kind of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just think it just makes too much sense, and it is around in a bunch of different places. There's like VAR models and stuff like that, and so it does exist. It just doesn't exist in our like SaaS startup world. Like I haven't seen it really exist. One of our investors is a firm called Tiger Global out in New York, and when I was meeting with them, I went and met with them earlier last month, and I was explaining this concept and some stuff that we're building around it called Bravado Flex. it's funny that the partner that I was meeting with, a guy named Griffin said to me, actually, it's so funny. We have a guy like that already. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, there's this guy that we pay a lot of money to in order to send him startups that he then evaluates and picks like the good ones that he likes so that he can connect them to his network, because he's got extremely high level relationships with like the CEO and CFO and CTO at payers. So that's like Walgreens, CVS, Blue Cross Blue Shield, like insurance payers and stuff like that. And so if you're a new drug company, if you're a new drug company, if you're a medical device company, if you're some, if you're trying to like in some way, if you're a new healthcare startup, et cetera, they basically pay him like he makes. They didn't say the exact amount, but I'm willing to bet it's like north of 6-7 figures is what this guy gets paid, because he can get you a meeting with like Walgreens' entire executive team. And like, you can't get that meeting, right? Like if you're a tiny little startup that wants to, like, you cannot get that meeting. You can send as many emails as you want. You can send, cupcakes to their door and SDR armies and whatever. You cannot get that meeting. Or maybe you can, but it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of time, and a lot of luck. And even then you may not get it. Or you can guarantee the meeting, right? And companies just pay up for it. And so I think that it does exist already in some facets, but it doesn't exist in our world. And I actually think that's really crazy that it hasn't come to. And that's my thoughts there. Ryan had a question. Ryan, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, this is awesome already, man. Thank you so much for jumping on here and talking through this stuff. I'm fascinated by this idea, and I wholeheartedly agree in this, in the regard that like salespeople and the sales profession, it's an ultimate meritocracy, and your ability to perform then dictates your ability to earn. And if you're then like taking down the walls between companies for sales reps to be able to do that in multiple spaces, that's amazing. My question around like the hiring somebody for a Rolodex or compensating them based on introductions, like it makes complete sense to me, but how much does that perpetuate the idea of just a bunch of old white dudes, bald dudes that look like me with a bunch of relationships, and I'm not saying those relationships aren't worth anything. Obviously they are, but like, how do we provide more opportunity to people to even establish those relationships that they can be leveraged at those companies in the same way? Because I feel like at least at the start, it's going to be a lot of the same people that are going to get picked up, and maybe it's vertical specific or industry specific, and you're going to find more women or people of color that are have relationships in different areas. But like, I don't know, I'm just curious your thoughts on this, because I imagine you're pretty passionate about it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think there's like 2, maybe 3 different facets of it. Let's start with maybe the most direct take on it, which is I'm not an old white dude. In fact, I was a 22-year-old, grew up like food insecure, like housing insecure, like, on government aid, Muslim, but like shitty Muslim, dude, who didn't have a single connection in the world. So I think sales is one of the most meritocratic professions that's out there. You don't need a high school or college degree or anything. You just need to show up and hustle, work hard, and be good, and you can like have a life and change your life and build a great career. So it's one of the things I'm super passionate about around sales. I don't think this is in conflict with that, to be clear. Like, I don't think that this is going to replace sales. You know what I mean? Like, there's 6 million salespeople in the United States, 30 million worldwide. And so I don't think that this is we're now going to like pivot from having 6 million B2B salespeople to like 100 people with relationships that everybody contracts to. Like, I don't see that. I think there's just many channels and ways to get in touch with customers, right? You run paid ads, but you also have an SDR team, but you also do billboards, we also do trade show. Like, I'm suggesting adding a channel, not removing a channel per se. And in fact, a channel that I think it could be far more lucrative for both company, like vendor, and for the person, themselves who is the channel. So I think it's like you've seen like the rise of B2B influencers as well. And that's like a thing that's really coming to the fore. And that's a new channel, right? I just see this as a new channel, not a replacement for the existing ones. But I do want to talk about the point that you're making, which I think is really important, which is around diversity in sales. You know, this is a long passion of mine. One of the founding principles of Bravado was that we wanted to get more women, more minorities, and more LGBTQ representation in sales. In fact, today we just launched something called Tech Sales U, which is a program that is designed to get folks who are not in tech sales free education so that they can then get a career into tech sales. And the reason, and in spirit of that, we have partnerships with sororities, special interest groups on campus across a bunch of different universities to actually advocate that they should consider a career in sales. Because as I'm sure many of you know, show me a Korean history major, I'll show you a salesperson. Like it's like one third of college students' first job out of school is sales. Right? 1/3 of college students' first job coming out of school is sales, some sort of sales role. Yet sales is taught at 70 universities, most of them not great ones, some really good ones, but many of them not the best programs, right? And Harvard doesn't have one, Stanford doesn't have one, Cal doesn't have one, UCLA doesn't have one. I'm lucky enough to live in the Bay Area where we're surrounded by good schools. None of them have one except for Chico State, who actually has an amazing one. But very, very few do. And that makes no sense. And so like, I really care about this problem. And I think it's a super important one. The way that we solve the one solution, there's many ways to solve it. I think one solution that I'm passionate about is I would like to get more college students aware of the fact that sales is a great profession. It's not just Boiler Room and Glengarry Glen Ross and Wolf of Wall Street or whatever, but it is actually a career that is just as impactful and technical as being in product design or engineering. Like I want kids to not go to McKinsey because they want to go to Salesforce. I want to see kids turn down offers to go to KPMG because your life's going to fucking suck if you go work at KPMG. I know a lot of people who worked at KPMG, they hated it, but it's prestigious. It's KPMG. Like I was in consulting, I was in tax, I was in accounting, like as if those things are superior to being able to, generate revenue and talk to customers and have high EQ and all the other things that sales teaches you how to do. And so, I think that's part of it, changing the stigma, but it's also getting fresh people in that are excited, because a lot of people self-select out of a career in sales, either because their parents would be like, like my parents were like, beta, sales is for white people, like literally my dad worked at Cisco Systems and he was an engineer. And the entire sales team at Cisco was white. Like everyone there was white. So my dad and all the engineers were Indian and Chinese, right? And so my dad was like, yeah, like, this is the move. So I think yeah, we definitely need to change all that. You have a follow-up question?
Well, no, it's not a follow-up question. I just like for somebody, I spent 3 years, like 2017, 2020, building a bootstrap sales boot camp that was providing free sales education to folks to get in place, monetize on contingency staffing. And the huge part of the purpose was like, I had no idea about sales before I got into it, but how can we provide more opportunities to more people to understand how incredible of a career path this is? So just as somebody that was building that and working in literally like some of the hardest but most professionally fulfilling years of my life, to see y'all like standing, and again, I was watching the months that you guys were standing up and starting to build Bravado. Like, I just think it's cool. So I commend you for taking that step, because I think a lot of people could have done it and a lot of people try to do it not very well. So I'm just stoked. So thanks for doing that, man.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you something. Let me just end. I think that brings up an interesting point. I think Tech Sales U is a shitty business to run. Like as a if that was all Bravado did, I wouldn't do it.
Trust me, bro. I know, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also see, the most darling of the Silicon Valley is it's called Bloom Tech now, but it's Austin Allred's company. shit, what's the company, the engineering one? Lambda School. Lambda School was the one that like got all the press around like being this alternative. Now that's like Bloom University or some shit like that because they want to try to be more legit. But like, you know, the idea that you are going to build a business off of educating people and then placing them into a role, I think it's just really hard because you are always kind of at odds with what's in the best interest of your student. You know, like either you're going to make money by taking money out of their pockets, or you're going to make money by, you know, placing them to a small set of employers that you have relationships with, or you're going to screen out people that can't afford the education. Like somewhere along the way, it gets messy. And so one of the benefits of being a company that does a bunch of other stuff is that, you know, Tech Sales U for us is just pure like giving back to the sales community. Like there's no revenue line attached to it. And, you know, there was never a calculation or a model done of like, well, if we get 80 students in and we place 10 of them, then we make 10 grand a placement. Like, no, right? It was literally like, we're going to do this because we want to change what the future of sales looks like. So it looks more like the people on this Zoom call, which Scott, I would commend you for building a really diverse again, this is one of the coolest group of sales professionals and leaders I've seen. So kudos to you, my friend. This is really cool. I mean, look, at the end of the day, like I want to see every sales team meeting look like this, you know? And so Tech Sales U is our small effort to do so. I support all the other people that are trying to do it too. We're not trying to compete with them or anything. You know, it's that's not a to answer your question, no, it's not. There's literally no revenue. There is a time. There is something that's important. One of the ways that Bravado as a company grows enterprise value is by making sales a more desirable profession, right? So in some ways, if you think about it, like every year there's like 1 million students that graduate or come into the workforce, right? And today maybe like 10,000 of them are like, oh, I'll consider a career in sales. And the other 990,000 either inadvertently fall into it or get into it and kind of get out of it. But what if 100,000 people considered it, right? What if we 10x the number of people that thought sales was a great profession and championed it? What if sales started being seen as being just as prestigious as being an engineer? Well, now all of a sudden Bravado's community creates more value, right? Like the value of our community increases. And so for us, yeah, I mean, it's by making sales a more valued profession.
I'm just writing your quotes in here. Ignore the chat.
Okay, the chat is, well, it's, I mean, you're like asking me questions. It's, but anyway.
Questions. Just turn the chat off.
Okay.
The
chat is lit.
Let me deal with that.
So the point of that is to say, anyway, I'll end by saying, you know, Bravado as a company becomes more valuable the more people are interested in sales. And so and if sales is seen as this like, you know, scummy, like we're going to automate away with chat bots and shit, then like the value of our community goes down. And people are like, whoa, sales is super important and really hard. And like hiring salespeople is really, really important. And we need to spend more money on go-to-market. Then Bravado's value goes up. And so, yes, there is a definitely value to Bravado to build Tech Sales U, but it's not at the impact of the student. It's at the impact of trying to do something that I think everyone on this call would agree with, which is get sales' reputation, give sales a facelift. You know?
Yeah, I love that. I love that quote. That's why I put it in there. Dale, you have a question. Dale Zwinsky, let's go to you.
Hey, Sahil, how's it going, man? Good to see you.
Good, sir. How are you? Good to see you.
Good. This is awesome, and it's really timely because I think there's a lot of things happening. I wanted to tie two pieces together that you're talking about. One, the diversity side, but then you were talking about sports analogies to the sales profession, and like it's really important that we put like the professional back in sales professional. Like sales has gotten this bad rap on being like scummy, like you're saying, and like, you know, in a professional league, any of the sports leagues, they practice, and we don't like in our community. There's nothing that happens in that space. So kudos to you. I think that's really where we need to go. My question is really wrapped around two things. One is I hear two paths that you're going down. One is fractional versus one is like a Rolodex, and I think they're kind of separated. Like you could have a Rolodex that may not tie into a company's organization. And even if I got a meeting with Walmart, doesn't mean I'm going to sell whatever widget or product or whatever I have. So you kind of have to bring more than a Rolodex with you, right? You kind of have to have the professional side of the sales piece. So that's the first part. And then the second part, as I have, because I've done a lot of startup work, but I also find that the CEO or the founder kind of want the CRO, the VP of sales in-house versus fractional, because there's like some stigma that you got to be embedded into the culture and you got to, everyone's got to see that you're on all the calls and all this stuff. And that's not really the case. Like CFOs have been fractional forever. I think they probably started the whole fractional piece. So I'm kind of curious your perspective and what you hear from the market on, and Scott, you as well, when you're talking fractional to people like seed, Series A founders that are like, no, my investors say I got to have the sales leader in-house.
Hmm. Scott, you want to go first? I mean, you're doing this, so I think you'll probably have the best perspective.
Well, to point of clarification, the definition of fractional C whatever is very important. So for example, I would never label myself a fractional CRO. I would never label myself that way. Other people might label me that way and do label me that way. I don't, because I don't manage the team. I don't go to the sales meetings. I don't push the reps individually one by one. I don't go to the like exec meeting, all this kind of stuff. That to me would be a fractional kind of work. So I don't do that stuff. And I feel really strongly in the work that I do of holding the line there. If I was doing true fractional work, I would go to those particular things. It is a fallacy to me for some board member or VC or whatever to try to mandate to a founder that you have to have somebody in-house. No, you don't. What you have to do is deliver results if you're a founder. If you're a founder, you deliver results to the board and the VCs if you took money from them. If you didn't take money from them and you're bootstrapping, then you have nobody to answer to, so you do whatever you want. You don't need somebody in-house, you need to fucking deliver results. How you go about getting those results shouldn't really matter. Mm-hmm. What difference does it make? Do you want to win an argument or do you want to win? And so I think, a lot of founders, and Sahil, I'm sure would agree with this, a lot of founders like don't have the experience or the chutzpah to like push back on this kind of.
So let's first of all, it's like impossible for me to agree with you more, to be honest, but let's break that down a little bit, which is because you used a word there that I thought was really interesting and insightful. You said VCs and boards mandate. You said mandate, and I want to talk about that really quickly. VCs and investors are in the business of generating returns for LPs. Let's be clear as to what is the job of a venture capitalist. The job of a venture capitalist is to return money to an LP. They are a investment vehicle in much the same way that when you and I place a sports bet or when you and I buy a stock, we are doing so not because it's funny, not because we're Samaritans, etc. We do so because we expect the value of that stock to increase over time, such so that I can sell that stock for more money than when I bought it and pocket the difference. When I make a sports bet or I play poker and I go all in on a hand or whatever it might be, I do so because I want to win more money than I started with when I sat down at the table or entered the casino, right? That's the game. So given that is the job of a venture capitalist, what is not the job of a venture capitalist is to run your company. And I have made it extremely clear, and this is something that as like I am a first-time founder, and I have made this mistake before. So let me just tell you very clearly and concisely that this is experience and scar tissue speaking, not Sahil pontificating from the mountains, which is I've made the mistake of listen. There's a great adage which is like, if you don't listen to your board, you might get fired. If you do listen to your board, you're definitely going to get fired. And I've made the mistake of listening to my board and doing things that I didn't think were the right decision for the company. And then later, when it didn't go well, them turning around and saying, well, why didn't you do the other thing? And it was actually hugely helpful for them to say that to me, because I then said, you're right. Should have just done the thing I want to do all along. And I'm so lucky that I have an investor. His name's Alex Bard at Redpoint. I would say that he is one of the best humans that I've had the opportunity to work with. There's plenty of times that he disagrees with what I want to do, and plenty of times he's right and I'm wrong, and plenty of times that he's wrong and I'm right. But ultimately, he always says to me, he goes, Sahil, it's your company, it's your ambition. I'm just here to support you in your journey. Do what you want. And ultimately, I backed you. I backed you. I didn't back, whatever is the thing that we're trying to do. I backed you. So it's your company. Do what you want. That doesn't mean he doesn't give me guidance and feedback and challenge notion and isn't incredibly smart and thoughtful, because he's all of those things. But he's an incredible role model as well, in being helpful for me to think about it, which is to now bring us back the fractional conversation. So there's two things I want to touch on the fractional thing. The first, let's just before we finish this thread, I want to interrupt myself to just make a quick point, which is something that you said in your initial question, Dale, which was this idea that like you need to be bought in, you need to be on the team, you need to be there at the meetings. I've heard someone, as we've brought this product Bravado Flex to market, which is like fractional work, something people have said is like missionary versus mercenary. And my response to which is always, well, if you want to test whether your sales reps are missionaries or mercenaries, the ones on your team are missionaries or mercenaries, stop paying them. And if they're missionaries, they'll still show up to work. And if they're mercenaries, they won't. And for that matter, stop paying someone in HR, or stop paying someone in marketing or in engineering or whatever. Just stop paying them and let's see how much of the mission they're here for, right? We're all fucking mercenaries.
Thank you.
We're all mercenaries, right? We are all trading time, effort, and labor in exchange for capital. That's what we do. That's the relationship between an employee and an employer. It's a relationship between a vendor and a contractor. That is the relationship, right? You are trading my skill, my time, my effort for your capital. That's the exchange of value. And so that's a joke, right? This idea that someone who's a contractor has a different level of care or a different level of whatever than someone who's a in-house employee is just ridiculous, laughable, and can be easily and it's kind of like when people anyway, I'll digress the point. It's easy to refute. Just be like, yeah, stop paying people and see how many missionaries you actually have. But I want to get to the other point, which was the question you asked around the Rolodex versus fractional work. I believe there are many different W-2 many different 1099 work for yourself businesses that will be built in sales. I think we've described two of them. One is this fractional CRO thing. There's the sales consultant, role, or a strategic advisor role that like Scott Leese plays. There's the Rolodex role that the dude at the Tiger dude does. I think we'll see it in SDR. I think it makes too much sense for companies to outsource their SDR teams to not to Memory Blue or whatever, which is fine. I mean, they're a great business. I'm not talking shit about them, but I could see it being really interesting for companies to say, hey, we only hire SDRs as 1099 workers. And then the ones that are like top performers basically graduate to being a W-2 worker or a full-time employee. And I could see that model making a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's really difficult to predict SDR performance. And some people are good at it. I think most people are not. And so rather than try to predict who's actually going to be a good SDR or not, you can just let results speak for themselves. Secondly, I think it's really difficult. I think there's like a lot of stupidity around this idea that, to be an SDR, there's all these qualifications that people have, because we do Bravado runs a talent marketplace, right? We help employers and candidates, and that's how we make our money. And so, I know the hiring requirements for 200 different companies, and many of them have requirements for SDR. They'll be like, yeah, I want someone with 1 to 2 years experience. Don't want this to be their first job out of school, and so I'm like, okay, well, so if that's the case, then that actually makes no sense, because anyone who's really good at SDR typically gets promoted at that company to AE. So if you're looking for a second-time SDR, you're probably getting someone who's not as good. It's not always the truth, but can be true. But then the other problem with that is it like you're basically excluding an entire class of people who don't have experience but could be awesome. Like, yeah, the most successful SDRs that I've ever worked with typically didn't come from SaaS or didn't come from sales. They came from something else and they transitioned. Like there was a woman who was a hairdresser who was amazing. She was hilarious, right? Hilarious, so good. And so I used to go and get the beard trim from her, and I always would tell her, I was like, you would kill it in sales. And then one day we were out drinking. Her husband had just lost his job, and so the three of us were out for a drink. And she was like, we're in a lot of trouble with money. Like it's really tough. And I asked her, I was like, how much do you make? How much do you think a hairdresser in San Francisco makes? What do you think?
80K, 80 to 100K.
She was making $36,000 a year, and she was 36K is what she was making, and she was the most senior person at that barber shop. $36,000 is what she made.
She didn't live in San Francisco.
Well, she didn't. I mean, yeah, that's the other thing.
Technicality.
And so I got her. So I
misunderstood the question.
Yeah. And so I got her. I got her a couple of interviews because I knew she was great. I told her a couple of friends of mine. I was like, yo, this is the funniest woman I know. Like, she's fucking hilarious. She'll be great. And today, I think she makes 250 to 300K a year. And she's like a top enterprise salesperson. Like she's a fucking.
Yeah, and so it's funny to say, like, not just BDRs, like, AEs, leaders, sales leaders, like it's so expensive to bring people in. If quota production or hitting quotas like at 40%, why not just 1099 the whole industry? Like,
Gareth.
Sorry, I'm agreeing with that. Yeah. So some of the best people I've hired ever are from hospitality, right? That's where my background is as well. So I've done everything from starting a company from scratch, selling it out of Ireland, but then moving into the US, selling it to a big company. Then I've run a Fortune 1000 sales organization. So I think I've had a fairly good gamut of the different types of sales environments. But the reason I was jumping in with Scott's case is I'm a fractional CRO for 2 startups now. And I just think it's fascinating because the question is, this is a question I ask myself every day, of course, is like, how do you get involved, but not too involved? And so, Scott, I've seen a lot of your stuff about, it's not about the process, it's about the outcome, right? And I feel like I get too dragged into the process. Like today I had one of the CEOs of the company he emailed a prospect. I'm like, don't email a prospect without letting me know, right? Because there is a process there. And I think that's maybe where I'm falling aside is that I'm maybe not being forceful enough in terms of the process. So I'd love to get either your Sahil or Scott's thoughts about how do you be a CRO without being a fractional CRO without being too involved?
It's specifically Sahil, he was talking about being too emotionally involved.
Yeah.
That was the original.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I wear my heart on my sleeve, so I find it really hard not to be emotionally involved in things. Like that's just kind of the way it is for me. And I think that's part of maybe that makes me part of the skill that's also an attribute in sales, and greatest skill, greatest weakness, whatever. But look, I think the answer is emotional involvement versus time involvement are very different. I think they're just very different. I think emotionally you can care, right? I think you should care. If you don't care, you shouldn't be doing it. Like, why are you working on something you don't care about? So like, I think caring and then there's a pride element, right? It's your name, it's your work. Like, my mom always taught me when I was a kid that, when you put your name on something, all of a sudden that like represents you. And someone might see that and think that, okay, well, that's who you are, right? And so like, I try to live by that principle. And so, I think the same applies there. I do angel investing on the side. I think that's an interesting kind of corollary to this. Like I've been doing it for years. And I occasionally will also take on an advisory role. Very rarely will take on an advisory role. I've only done it 3 or 4 times, but with a founder who needs a lot of help around go-to-market and sales and wants me to spend some time. And what
We're
I
probably on the same page there as well. One of the companies I'm involved in, I've invested into, so we're probably
yeah, okay, so
similar.
you're familiar with that. So let me tell you something, which I think is really critical, which is everything you do, document it. I think that's one thing, right? Like never do anything, document everything. And the reason for that is because then you turn that into material, and then that material becomes a resource library, and then you're just like pulling shit and dragging it from one place to the other.
Copy paste forever.
I'm sorry?
Copy paste forever.
Copy paste forever. Well said. I like that. Yeah. I mean, it's really true. You know, like for example, I was asked to build a comp plan once. And so I built a comp plan. And then there was another time I was asked to build a comp plan. So I built a second comp plan and then the third comp plan. Well, you know, eventually I stopped building comp plans and I instead just built a guide of how to build a comp plan. And now anytime I angel invest in a company, I just give them the guide because they always ask, it always comes up, right? Someone's always like, oh, comp plan. And I give it away for free to Bravado members as well. So, you know, if anyone wants it, how do you build a comp plan? I just hand it over. And so like having that kind of like thinking of like structured process and stuff, I think is just really helpful. Which is, you know, like oftentimes you're asked to do things like, oh, can you help me? Like another question I used to get asked a lot prior to Bravado was like, oh, can you help me interview a candidate? That would be something I get, right? Like we have a candidate and like, can you spend some time interviewing this person? And instead I just made a guide of how do you interview a VP of sales. And so then I would just hand the guide over. So I don't need to spend time on it.
Yes.
You know, like that's the most important
That's
thing.
that's also how you scale yourself, by the way, Garrett. So you can work with more than one, more than 2 to 3 to 4, whatever, because what Sahil is talking about is not having to do this labor intensive work every single time. I made this funny quip about copy paste forever, but like that shit's fucking true. And I can do that because I documented everything going all the way back like 15 years ago when I was first getting into sales leadership. And I was putting down on paper like all the things that I did because I have a fucked memory. And I didn't know I was supposed to document everything. I was just like, I need to write this down so I don't forget it, so I can do it again. But now I have this 2-decade-long library of like stuff. And whether it's a comp plan or a sales pitch or whatever, so much is transferable. It's actually a lot less work than a lot of people think it is over time.
Yeah.
One last really quick question for you as well, if you don't mind, Scott, is so look at you and people like Justin Welsh and everybody else out there. I mean, is that the key, is just getting that repeatability in terms of experience? Like, is that the one thing you put it down to, or is it also just that broader connection piece?
I think that's a longer, more complicated question based on bringing in Justin and other people. But you get, for me, I decided to be really good at one thing, really good at the one thing before I started worrying and wondering about other things and adding to other things. And that is kind of a central thesis to how I cut the W2 cord eventually and did what I did. I think Justin's journey is a little bit different. If you really know him as a person and the things that he's done, his journey is a little bit, you know, different than mine. And there's no one way to do it. But if you pay attention to people who are super successful, they're really good at one thing. That's the core thing. It's like the anchor tenant thesis for strip malls, right? Like you put the one store in the strip mall and people go there, and then there's foot traffic spillover to the other stores that benefit. So my one thing was, theoretically, I'm really good at being a sales leader, being a VP of sales. That's the thing I can hang my hat on, and other things can kind of spell out, you know, from there. And even more niche down was, I'm really good at going 0 to 20. Not, you know, 50 to 100. I'm not the guy that people fly in on a helicopter with a beard trimmer to replace Sahil after he got the company to 50 million, so I can take them public. That's not my thing, right?
And I think personally, by the way, that's probably my biggest challenge, is because I've been CEO a couple of times, is I'm generally quite good at everything, but not specifically very good at anything. And
Yeah.
so it's like you say, is trying to identify that is some of the
there's interesting value there, and I don't want to diminish it, but you're also maybe the master of nothing.
Yeah.
When you do that. I literally had this conversation. I had this conversation, by the way, Sunday with my 12-year-old son, who is a very good athlete and good to great at all of these different sports, but is not growing yet, hasn't hit puberty, and he's 5 foot nothing, 80 pounds, and he's playing against kids who are 5'10" already and weigh 160. And it's like, you're coming up against a point where you can't do everything.
Yeah.
I went through this same thing as a kid, going through sports and whatnot. Like, do you have to decide, do I want to just be good at everything and have fun and whatnot? Or do I really want to be fucking great at one thing? Because something has to go. I got to cut or trim something if I really want to become an expert at a thing. Yes. So that might be something for you to think about, Gareth. And I don't know your story, specifically, but that is something that I think for me worked really well. I didn't try to say, I'm going to go work here and check this box where I did big Fortune 500 sales. I'm going to go work at a FANG company. I'm going to check that box. I said, fuck all that. And I said, I like this one stage doing this one thing. I'm just going to become like the best person there is at that one thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And
I'm totally a believer, by the way, you're rewarded for specialization, right? You really are. In terms of, if you're good at one thing, you'll get rewarded. Sorry, Sahil.
Hopefully.
No, that's exactly right.
All right, let's go.
Generalists are not being a generalist is not a great way to make a lot of money. It's just not.
Yeah, he's right. Let's go to David. David, are you there? We got David and then Wayne.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm gonna come off camera. So Sahil, love the conversation, specifically on the AE side. The value of the Rolodex and the relationships, I think, is one thing that's extremely valuable. But what about I think it's what's undervalued is the AE's ability to successfully manage that relationship once the introduction is already done, i.e. that process of how do you hire a sales VP, right? How do you copy and paste? How do you attribute the value of not just being able to land the relationship or get the connection, but actually manage the relationship effectively to some kind of either shared win or revenue or whatever it is, in respect of IP and value to that AE that they can add and subsequently charge for, if you will, to companies that they want to drop the W-2 and leverage out their value to.
Yeah, David, it's a good question. So I would advocate against doing that. I would advocate against managing the relationship all the way through. And it's for the same reason that we were just talking about, which is time. Like it takes a tremendous amount of time in order to close a deal. Making an introduction is, a couple text messages, maybe an email, maybe one very short call, and then off you go, right? And so
can I amend it real quick?
Yeah, sure.
More so the process that could be documented and given to somebody else to go manage, but how to actually manage. Yeah, sorry, not actually managing the relationship themselves.
I see. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a company called GLG out there, which is, I don't know if folks are familiar. Guide Point's another one. Now, these orgs hire experts. They basically contract with experts and pay them a high hourly rate to get on the phone with a customer who wants to pick their brain on something that they're an expert in. So for example,
easy side hustle money, by the way, when you're an old man like me.
Yeah, it's good side hustle money. And so I used to do this prior to Bravado. Actually getting its Series A, because I didn't take a salary for the first 2 years that Bravado was getting off the ground. And so in order to pay the bills, I was doing GLG calls as part of my thing. And so what they do is, so if a VC wants to invest in outreach, they'll be like, hey, let's do diligence with like 20 people who really know sales. And so they would hit me up and they'd pay me $750, which was my rate, for 1 hour to basically ask me a bunch of questions about what I thought about sales enablement and outreach and sales loft and gong and whatever else they wanted to ask me about. And so there was this like very fixed like knowledge timeshare sort of thing that they were creating. I think it could be interesting to create something like that. I could see some value around that, which is like, hey, we're working a deal with IBM and we're just stuck in their procurement department. Like we can't get this contract out. No one's answering our calls, et cetera. Does anyone know how to sell to IBM, how to get a contract out of IBM's procurement department? If I've done that a bunch and I know the IBM team and whatever, like, what if I turned around and charged $500 to get on the phone for me to tell you that? Like, I think that could be kind of an interesting thing. Wayne, it looks like you need to go. Do you want to ask your question really quickly?
It's a very similar question to the one that David's asking, actually. I wanted just to get practical about how AEs can really scale themselves beyond just the Rolodex. You kind of you're going down that road of answering it. So
I see. Well, let me just elaborate, because that question is slightly different though interesting, which is like there's actually a lot of interesting stuff that an AE knows and has access to that many people want to have. Like for example, some AEs I know are incredibly gifted writers. Like I think it's one of the skills that can really make you stand out in sales is just being an incredible writer. You know how many companies are sending shitty cold emails, like just awful cold emails? Like, I don't understand why an AE who's really good at writing wouldn't be like, hey, if your cold emails suck and don't convert, like you can pay me $5,000 and I will rewrite all of your all your emails and all your email copy or whatever. Just do it as a service. You offer a landing page, you put some screenshots of email copy that you've written, conversion stats, a couple companies you've done it for, and just, post about it once a week on LinkedIn. I bet you could clear easily one client a month. It's like $60,000, that you could make just by rewriting emails. Like as a company, if my company is struggling to convert cold emails and someone was like, hey, would you pay $5,000 to solve this problem? And the answer is obviously yes. Like that's obvious. Anyone would do that, And so like things like that, you know what I mean? Like I just think things like that are there's many ways to scale yourself as an AE. There's many things out there that are specialized skill sets that salespeople have that other people want to have access to because it generates revenue and does a bunch of good things for their company. That they think the only way to get is by paying up for some fancy CRO or VP of sales and full-time. I actually think it makes a lot of sense that to Scott's point of like, I'm the 0 to 20 guy. Like let's say you just raised your Series A, right? Your company just raised a Series A, 10 million bucks, maybe 8 million bucks in today's economy. And now you need to like build out your first sales team, right? You're founder-led sales and you're trying to transition to like a sales team. There's probably like 5 to 10 extremely similar, repeatable things that you need to go through in order to do that. And if you could productize that, you can basically ship that off. But then the interesting thing is, the first like 5 AEs are probably doing something really similar. And if you're like a good founding AE, you can do that. Maybe you're a good enterprise seller, you can do that. Like, I think there's a lot of ways for you to create value for yourself and monetize the skills that you have. Recruiter. Oh, great one, man. That's actually a really good one. I know a bunch of friends of mine who've done this, who basically have big sales networks, and they realize that most companies struggle to hire sales teams. I'm going to say hire for sales reps. And so they basically are like have a side hustle where they refer their friends to sales jobs and take a commission for it. And it makes total sense for the company to pay. Why wouldn't you? Like, you're willing to pay a commission to a recruiter. Why wouldn't you pay a commission to a salesperson who can actually validate that this person's good?
Also, honestly, they pay a lot less because most people don't recognize the value of that single intro and service that they provide. There's actually more value there that salespeople could be extracting.
Oh, tell me more. I didn't quite understand what you're saying.
Well, what I mean is a contingency recruiter, for example, might pay 10 to 20% for landing like that individual. So
right.
I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm just like, yeah, I'll refer you to my friend who's a VP of sales and, pay me $5,000 if you hire him. Well, little do you know, they'd probably pay you fucking 50 grand actually, which is about 25% of year one salary for a VP of sales. So I'm just saying a lot of people don't understand that particular value exchange and are actually extracting less than they could be. That's what I was trying to get at.
I have a funny story about that, which is one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got in my life around pricing was whatever you think you should charge, just add a zero, right? And someone said that to me once. And I kind of thought it was a joke when they said it, you know? And they're like, no, just try it. Just the next thing you're selling, whatever is the price, just add a zero. And I was like, okay, let's see how that goes. So I was at Glassdoor at the time, and we were selling job ads. So we were selling ads for software engineers. And we used to charge $1 per click. So for every software engineer that clicked on your job, it was $1. Next call I had was with Gibson guitars. You guys know Gibson guitars? Yeah. Gibson guitars. Literally, it was the next call I had after this conversation. And just as a joke, like they were looking to hire for some engineering positions and stuff, like mechanical engineers and stuff. I was like, yeah, it's $10 a click for software engineers. And they just bought it. Like literally, they're like, okay, cool. Just paid for it. I was like,
exactly.
What? Like literally just 10x. And when the contract came in and the CEO and like I told the VP of sales and whatever at the time, like they were just like dumbfounded, you know, they were just like, what, you know, and that's actually how we set the price at Bravado Talent. So at Bravado Talent, when we were thinking, how much should we charge for our all you can hire like SaaS recruiting model? The initial price that the team came to me with was $1,000 a month, right? We charge $1,000 a month. That'll be $12K a year per customer. And they had this whole model that they built. And I was like, cool, we're going to charge $10,000 a month. They thought that, and literally, like everyone was just like, no, like that's crazy, like that's way more expensive than even LinkedIn is, and like, no, right? And so we started selling at 10, and we don't get every contract at 10. Some we get at 8, some we get at 9, some we get at 7.5, whatever. No one's paying 1,000 or even 5,000, you know, where every contract's above $5,000. Every contract's above 7,500, to be honest. And so, like, you know. Like it's just people just don't understand pricing. Like in everything you're doing, you're undercharging, no matter what it is. Just whatever it is, just add a zero and try it next time. And it'll somehow still work, or it won't, and they'll like negotiate down 20% or something, and you'll still be getting, you know, $8,000. And so like it's just anyway, that's just the whole thing. All right. Does anyone else have any question? That we didn't. There are people who do. Yeah. Okay, so the Salesforce story that someone just posted there. Yeah, I've seen that a lot too. Like we have someone at our company who's great at it. Like it's this dude in Brazil, and he's got a big network in Brazil, and he keeps referring engineers to us. They're our buddies, and he probably is making more money from his recruiting than he is from working at Bravado, because he's like literally like staffed like 20 engineers. It's great. I mean, I'm happy to pay him. All right. So
I got a question from my special guest who is going to take themselves off mute right now. They're actually in a different room in my house. You ready?
Yes.
Richard, are you here?
He's on mute.
Of course he's on mute. So where's Lori Dunn? Lori Dunn was on my podcast with Richard one time, and Richard is famous for trying to speak while on mute. And I'm always like, Richard, you're on mute. And so Lori Dunn was so sweet. She sent Richard and I a coffee mug that says, Richard, you're on mute.
The funny story about that is that Richard's still on mute as we have this entire conversation. He still hasn't gotten off mute.
Just use my.
He literally is walking into.
He just came into my office to tell me.
Can't figure out how to unmute himself. I want you to understand that this man has technology companies as his client, right? I just want you to know that.
Okay. Look, if you really want to go down that path, Sahil, we can talk about Scott's inability to manage even a CRM, and he still uses an Excel spreadsheet to track his clients, which but I'm on my phone. I don't use Zoom for my phone. So anyway, hi everybody.
It's extremely difficult.
So it is for me. Anyway, Sahil, what are you seeing? For the crew, like I'm starting to hear I have these different things. Like no commission sales orgs where you really pay up on the base to create that sort of stability that reps want, and nothing if maybe a smidge of a commission, like it's not heavy commission based, but it helps remove the anxiety of the turnover kind of stuff. I've seen that. Obviously, we still hear about the the commission only sales orgs, which I still can't ever get behind. I'm curious, what are other people seeing in the industry? Like, what do you see? Because I hear about it, but I don't see it and I don't experience it every day.
Yeah. So it's okay. So let's talk about this. I have been on record with a whole series I wrote on LinkedIn a couple of years ago around killing the sales quota, and thinking that the way that sales quotas do more harm than good, and that sales teams should not be measured on a quota and they should not be paying commission. So let's start here. I think that every person at the company should have variable compensation. I believe that. I think that variable compensation makes sense because you want people to be financially incentivized to create great work, right? So I think that's one. And two, I believe that the right split is somewhere around 80-20, 80% guaranteed, 20% variable comp. And I think that should be at least across the entire executive team, the standard, potentially across the entire company. And yes, everyone, HR, like, I don't care like who you are, like at least 80-20 split. And I'm working on developing a plan where we roll that out across Bravado, actually. So it's not just something I'm talking about. It's something I'm actively working on.
Are you still measuring? But are you still measuring it against the standard salary? It's the traditional 50-50 split. 150 base, 150.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then so now all of a sudden that 300 becomes an 80%. 300 is your base.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm clear. I just want to make sure that
why. And let's talk about why that actually matters. Let's talk about why that's important. The reason that's important is because all of a sudden, everyone's really focused on what the right quota is. And everyone's really focused on making sure that the quotas are like realistic and whatever, because people just throw fake quotas out there because they know the reps won't hit them. And they're like, well, I don't have to pay if they don't hit them. And so it actually creates a lack of accountability on the leadership, who can basically say, oh, like this literally happened with a Bravado Jobs client who shall go unnamed because I fired them after I heard about what happened. So there was a candidate that they were interviewing who their standard offer was 70-140, right? That's what it was like a junior sales role. So it was 70K base, 140 OT. And they had a candidate who basically said, look, I've got another offer and it's at 160 OTE. 180 OT, 180. And so I can't take a 40K drop. And they basically said, well, we'll match it. And so they sent him an offer for 70K base and 110K OTE. And they just increased the quota by the same amount. And so let's say the quota was at like 500K, they made the quota 700K. And the person signed it because they didn't know, right? They didn't know how to calculate all this stuff. So they signed it. And then I found out, because all of a sudden in Greenhouse, that it went from like offered to accepted or hired or whatever that stage is. And that sends a Slack notification. And when I saw that, I was really surprised, because I was like, this person took a 40K pay cut in order to join this company. The company wasn't even that great. It was fine. It was a good company, but it wasn't great. So I texted and I was like, yo, this is a big change. They're like, no, they matched it. And I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I can't believe they came up 40K. He's like, yeah. I was like, cool. Can you send me the offer letter? And he did. And I read it and I saw what they had done. I saw that they upped the quota. And people do that. That's literally happening everywhere. I know that story is really that story casts a really bad light on that company. But actually that's exactly what's happening in every company. They're just like making shit up left and right.
I want to follow it up, Sahil, because I've read about and done some research and talked to some people. We've millennialized the sales workforce, right? Which I think is long overdue. So for the millennials here, that's a good thing.
Which millennium are you referring to? The one you were born in or this one?
No, I was born in the last century, so thank you. Fuck off. Scott's laughing in the background, like I hope. He's actually rolling a blunt.
860 80.
Yes. So
King of
so
Oz.
this has to do with compensation, though, and if you're seeing this yet, the theory is that millennials tend to be more about the experience, the meaning, the promotion, the career path. Gen Z is coming out. We've talked to some people, some really smart people who coach these kids, and they're kind of like, no, just give me the money. They're way more coin operated than, they're more coin operated like me as a Gen Xer, right? So now my question is, what's happening to the salaries now?
Yeah. So let's talk about that. First of all, that's extremely natural. That and then the next generation will be super touchy-feely around career and stuff. And that's just because, if you live in Arizona for a very long time, like you summer in Arizona, you're like, I'd move me to Alaska, like it's very natural that you kind of go the pendulum always swings hard, overcorrects on both sides. So I think that's normal. But let's go to the question, which is where are salaries going around sales? I believe, again, this is just my personal belief, though I do have, I guess, the benefit of seeing 50,000 sales team members across Bravado's network, or I guess what 50,000 companies, sales teams are kind of doing and changing around comp plans and whatever. What I'm starting to see is that equity in sales is going up, which I think is really interesting. It used to be equity grants to sales sales.
Are they RSUs or are they just bullshit equity and they're just trying to take advantage of 23-year-olds?
I mean it as a percentage of the company that people are getting their hands on. So what I mean is like say the standard offer for sales is like, I don't know, 10 bips or something like that at a Series A company or, some whatever. Like now it's like closer to 25 bips and stuff. And part of the reason why is because there's been a lot more sales leaders have been posting on LinkedIn talking about this, talking about like the fact that like, equity is like you should be arguing how much you should be getting, et cetera. And there's just many more free tools that are out there that showcase how much equity you should be getting at each stage. And so people are starting to get a little savvier around this. So I'm definitely seeing that sales reps are able to get, like, for example, there was a company that wanted to hire a VP of sales. And they had earmarked half a point in equity for the person, and he ended up getting 2.5 points, out of them. And so, like, I've seen some like really meaningful change there, which I think is really exciting. I think that's really good to see. In terms of like next generation of workers, like, how are things changing around that? I think that normalized being a mercenary thing is really interesting. I think that people have gone to a world where it used to be that like the thing that people really valued was like, I'm gonna get a good job, and then I'm gonna go to a good school, then we get a good job at a good company and whatever. And now people are a lot more open to freelance. 1/3 of the people in the United States do freelance, and by 2027, that number is expected to be half. So half of this country will be freelance workers in the next 4 years. And so like there's some real change that's happening. I think people had a, when people think about like, work obsessed cultures and stuff like that, like I think China is a great example with their 996 policy. For those that don't know what that means, in China, it's traditional, especially for like factory workers and stuff, but across the board to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week and have Sundays off. That's a very common sort of workforce, right? So people think of 996 and they're like, oh, like that's awful, like that's terrible work conditions and stuff. But you look at the United States, and I think there's a lot of people that work those kinds of hours. Like, honestly, they don't get paid for them, but they work those kinds of hours. They work crazy. I mean, it's super stressful and whatever. And I think now what's changing is that people are going to demand that they're only going to work a limited amount of time. I think freelance is going to continue to grow. I think it's going to permeate every aspect of our culture. I think Uber and Airbnb, though in a shitty way, but in a meaningful way, changed the perception that like, oh, you can work for yourself. Now, of course, it's not exactly for yourself. And there's a lot of reasons why they're shitty, and like we all know that. But like, it did change in the diaspora. Like we're starting to see it in a different way. And so like now where we are today is a world in which it's very common, very, very common for people to want to work for themselves. And I think that will continue to grow, and it will change sales. I think it will change marketing. I think it'll just change our professions, and for the better, because it's going to force companies to really pay up to get you to work for them. Like, you know, if you want Scott, like imagine I wanted to hire Scott Leese, you know, as my VP of sales for Bravado. The opportunity cost for Scott to do that would be so high that I would need to pay a tremendous amount of money to him in order to do that, because the alternative is he gets to live a good life and like, you know, surf and do whatever. And so like for Scott, you know, that's the real fucking value, you know, is like creating a world in which you don't have to work for someone means that you could get paid a fuckload of money if you were to. And I think that's really cool.
Now we're on camera together.
Wow.
Ooh.
We're getting, So we're getting towards the end of our time here together. I want to be respectful of Sahil's time. Does anybody else have some questions that they want to fire off real quick?
Yeah, we'll do hot takes.
Hot take. Rapid fire.
Lightning round.
I'll go at once. Nobody has any questions.
Nobody. See, I told you.
Whoa. We got a brave soul, Elise.
Super curious if we did shift and like, boom, Rolodex, it's happening. You can be hired in that way that we were talking about at the very beginning. How does that shift culture in terms of relationships, and what kind of value do you place on, you know, certain connections that you have?
Yeah. I think that buyer aligned salespeople makes a lot of sense to me. I think generally speaking, it makes a lot of sense to me that an organization could hire somebody to help them evaluate and decide what piece of software to buy. I think that's actually a world that makes too sense, because as we all well know, companies are really bad at buying software. I will tell you right now, with no uncertainty, that I could sell HubSpot to somebody and then switch companies to Marketo and then sell that same company Marketo, and then switch companies 2 years later to whatever the fuck, and then go sell them that thing too. Like, I know I can do that because I've done it, and like I've seen it done plenty of times. And like this is how Salesforce won against Oracle a lot. You know, Salesforce basically figured out that like all the value in Oracle was in the sales reps. So what they did was they figured out like, oh, who's the sales rep that has the best relationship with Coca-Cola at Oracle? Cool. Find that person and pay him $500,000 to come work at Salesforce. Like, that's literally what they did. And that's how they won the Coke account. Like, they were doing that. And so I think that like the fact remains, whether you want to pay for it or not, the fact remains that people buy from people that they like, they know, and they trust. Those are the facts. Now, you can build a relationship. You can get to know someone. You can get them to like you. You can get them to trust you. But that takes time. If you want to shortcut that process, you can. But now I think the thing you're trying to get at is like, well, how does that change my relationship with the customer if like I'm selling them out and I'm like making money off of it or whatever, you know, like, do they get a kickback for that? Or like, what do we do? You know, I see that, right? And I think it is an interesting problem. But you got to remember what the current problem is, right? What is the current confines? The current construct is vendor wants to sell my product. So I hire you, Elise, as a salesperson, and I pay you money to go and bother people to buy my product. And I pay you extra money if you get them to say yes. And so the customer, how does the customer end up building a trusting relationship with you in that construct, right? In that construct, you are being paid money to call me, but I'm withholding half of your money, and I will only pay it to you if you buy my product. Yet somehow we build trusting relationships in that construct. So I don't know why we couldn't do it in this other one. It seems a lot more natural to me.
That's a really good point.
I mean, it's just true, right?
One thing that I would like to say is it's not as hard to grow, maintain, and nurture many, many relationships all at the same time as people think it is. It's really not.
It's not.
It's just effort and focus and time. One thing that I think that I've done very well is that exact thing. I don't know how many of you on this call right now I have personal relationships with, where you email me, text me, Slack me, whatever, and I fucking reply. I am like death and taxes. I'm a guaranteed response every single time. It's not that hard. It's really not. I have the same excuses you all have. I got family, I got kids, I got health, I got workouts, I got work, I got whatever it is. So I think we overestimate sometimes the amount of effort it takes to maintain these relationships. I can do all that stuff, whether I work for one company or 20. I really can. And I don't think it's a superpower. I think it's just, that's what I care about. That's what I focus on. That's what I maintain. I'm not trying to extract revenue. I don't worry about value exchange. I literally just try to say like, hey, how can I be helpful today? And eventually, at some point in time, I have some offer like, hey, I'm doing this Patreon thing, or hey, I put this untethered blueprint course together with Ryan. And eventually those things hopefully become appealing and come back around. So that's kind of my thought, Elise, on your question is, all of us possess the ability to invest a little bit more in the relationships that we have. And it doesn't take a tremendous amount of effort. It's a couple text messages. It's a response to an email or a Slack from people that you have familiarity with. And that familiarity can become friendship, and that friendship can become trust, and that trust can become a partner in business or in personal lives, to be honest with you.
Well, just I mean, case in point is Scott and I, like
Sure.
Scott and I have been kind of friends, sales nerds, whatever, hang out occasionally, see each other, talk to one another, text over Liverpool or the Warriors or whatnot. Big sports fanatics. But I don't think I've asked anything of Scott. I don't think Scott's ever asked anything of me. Like we just, whatever. And then serendipity.
And one other point, that's over a period of a couple of years, by the way.
Yeah, years. Like, I think 3 years, to be honest. I think 2019. Yeah, 2019. That's right. 2019 is when we were talking about the LinkedIn influencer stuff, because we were still in an office at that time. I remember texting with you as I was leaving work, and we haven't left work in 2.5 years. So it's 3 years, right? We've been friends. I never asked him for anything. He never asked me for anything. And then suddenly we find this like incredible moment of serendipity, where we at Bravado are launching a product to help salespeople basically become W-2 workers. 1099 workers, basically run their own businesses, do all these different things like fractional stuff, whatever. As Scott is releasing his untethered blueprint, so we connect over that, and I tell him what I'm doing, he tells me what he's doing, and we're like, hey, maybe there's a way we can work together. And so we set up a partnership, and we're going to offer Scott's course to all of the people who signed up for Bravado Flex. Hopefully Scott's going to come in and offer some guidance to folks who for the first time are considering doing it, cutting the W-2 cord and are considering working on their own, which is a little nerve-wracking, right? It's a little scary, obviously. And so we're working together on it. And it makes great business sense, and there's hopefully going to be a great partnership, or maybe it won't work out great and we'll still remain friends. But like the point is, for 3 years we built a relationship. And so when the moment came, it was like the easiest negotiation of all time, like it wasn't even a negotiation. I was like, what do you want? What do I, like a few text messages.
Yeah.
And Bravado is the largest community for salespeople in the world. Scott is the person I know as like the fractional CRO. I know he doesn't like that, but like, you know, one of the people I know who basically decided, no, I'm not going to do the full-time sales thing. I'm going to go do it on my own, and has been instrumental in helping other people get there, which I know because I've heard from them secondhand that Scott was super valuable to them. And so that kind of speaks to the value of building a long-term relationship without asking for a lot of time. I think that is definitely true. You know, I could not agree with that more.
And it doesn't dissipate, or the strength of it, you know, doesn't go away, Elise and everyone, just because you might have that kind of conversation relationship with other people. And that's a really important part to focus on.
And one last thing around that, which I think is just really important, is I want to make sure I highlight, which I really think this is key actually, is that I saw in the chat someone said, you know, focus on value exchange with your employer, not your colleagues. And I know that was meant from a company standpoint, but something that people get wrong all the time is that they view their boss as the company, as opposed to viewing them as a human, right? And the inverse of that as well, you know, like the boss views their employees as like workers for the company as opposed to like humans. And that's actually a huge mistake, because the vast majority of the connections that you will be able to leverage are those connections. Like that VP of sales is going to go land a different job at a different place, and then they're going to need to hire. And if they have a big network of salespeople that like them, then it's going to be super easy for them to poach the best people. Or, you know, that rep is going to need a job in the future, and that VP of sales is working somewhere else. And if they had a good relationship, they'll hire them back in. And like, you know, playing the long game is really important. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that you just got to play the long game. Like anytime you try to play the short game, anytime you try to play the transactional game, it's just wrong. You're just going to get fucked up around it. So.
All right. Well, this has been a blast. This has been one of, if not the best Tequila Tuesdays, I would say, in a number of months. Definitely through the summer and early fall. Not because Richard is here making fun of me, because of Sahil and the topic and the timeliness and the conversation and the relevance, I think, to everyone. So I appreciate, Sahil, you spending some time with us. Connect and follow with Sahil on LinkedIn if you haven't already done so. Check out Bravado and the War Room and his community. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you next time on Tequila Tuesday.
Yeah, and most important, you know what I'd love out of this? I'd love somebody who maybe hasn't yet downloaded and read the untethered blueprint to do so. I've been lucky enough to get my hands on it, and I think it's absolutely awesome. And I would love to see somebody maybe even sign up for Bravado Flex and give it a shot. You know, that's what I would love to see. You know, Scott, one of Scott's favorite things. Man, there's a lot of Scottisms I like, but my favorite Scottism of all time is when he shows that actions are greater than words. You know, you've all seen that one, right? Like, it's one thing to talk about flex and one thing to talk about, you know, cutting the W-2 cord and then going back to your job. It's another thing to be like, you know what, I actually want to do it. Like one person, I don't need, you know, this isn't like a, you know, evangelism program for everyone, but I would love one person to show up and give it a shot. I'd love to see that person get successful. I'd love to see someone successfully cut the W-2 cord and walk out and someone's lives to be better. So I can tell a story like the one I told about my hairdresser. I can tell that story again. You know, I showed up to this Tequila Tuesday thing.
Yeah.
And somebody was there, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Andrew, you Canadian, whatever they call a fucking W-2 in Canada, you cut that shit. Okay. That's what you cut. The poutine cord.
Wow. Ryan, that was super original, Ryan.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He's good. He's the ingenuity behind everything. Richard's the ingenuity behind surf and sales. I really don't do anything, Sahil. That's the secret to my genius. I do nothing.
You surround yourself with people who are better than you, and that, in fact, is the genius.
Bam. See you next time, everybody. Thank you so much.